This week at the box office, the Lego Movie 2 builds a weak but winning weekend. What Men Want is pursued by audiences, and Cold Pursuit's box office numbers heat up due to Liam Neeson's Hot Water. All that and more on this episode of The Weekend Take.
You're listening to The Weekend Take, and now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer, and with me this week is veteran actor of the stage and screen, director and cinematographer, John Romeo. Also, you may know him as the voice of The Weekend Take. John, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thanks for having me here.
For those of you that are first-time listeners, what The Weekend Take is, it's a weekly podcast that breaks down the weekend box office results, but looks beyond the numbers at the current talking points, topics, and trends of the film industry. So what we'd like to do is we start off every episode by looking at the films that left the top 10, and this week there were 4 such instances. First up, The Kid Who Would Be King from Fox dropped from number 7 to number 14, taking in $1.5 million, a 64.7% drop from last weekend. It lost nearly half of its screens, losing 1,682 screens to bring its theater count down to 1,846, a per-screen average of $813, and it brought its cume up to $15.7 million in its third week of release. Also leaving the top 10 this week, Escape Room from Sony dropped from number 9 to number 13, taking in $1.6 million, dropping 43.5% from last week. Losing roughly a quarter of its screens, it dropped 603 screens to bring its count down to 1,339, a $1,200 per screen average to bring its cume up to $54.7 million in its 6th week of release. Also leaving the countdown this week was They Shall Not Grow Old from Warner Brothers, which dropped from the number 10 spot to number 12. The film took in $1.67 million, only a 31% drop from last week. It managed to pick up a few screens, gaining 92 theaters to bring its count up to 827 screens, just over $2,000 per screen, for a cume of $13.5 million in its 8th week of release. And lastly, A Dog's Way Home from Sony dropped from the number 8 position to number 11, taking in $1.9 million, a 46% drop from last week. The film lost about a third of its screens, losing 953 screens to bring its count down to 2,009 theaters, a $971 per screen average to bring its cume up to $38.9 million in its 5th week of release. So now looking at our 4 films that have left, making room for our 4 new entries this week. John, do any of these films stick out to you, or do you have any opinions on them, or were any of these a surprise to see them leaving?
No, actually not. Most of them I don't know. I haven't seen them. I just finished going through my screeners, so I can't say that I've seen these. They were not on the nominations. But I guess nothing surprises me here. I mean, they all seem to be sort of smaller films and nothing huge that crowds would be dying to see. At least that's my opinion.
All of them had been out for quite some time. I mean, Considering their genres, I mean, The Kid Who Would Be King seems to be Fox's first real big flop of 2019.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have a film with a $59 million budget that you throw out onto over 3,500 screens, put no marketing behind, and, you can't really expect a return like that. And at $15.7 million for a cume on a $59 million budget, that definitely looks like Fox is going to lose quite a bit on that film. Still a complete mystery why you would put a film out that big with that big of a budget on that many screens and not let anybody know that it's happening. And then looking at Escape Room and A Dog's Way Home, they're both kind of genre films in their own regard. Escape Room, a genre horror film made for what a genre horror film's budget would be, about $9 million. This the opposite of The Kid Who Would Be King for Sony, whereas Escape Room took in almost $55 million domestically. It crossed $100 million worldwide on a $9 million budget. Very successful for Sony. Same thing with A Dog's Way Home. Genre, cliched family film involving animals and tugging at the heartstrings on an $18 million budget, taking in $39 million with a little bit of foreign gross as well. Sony has to be pretty happy, and Fox has to be pretty envious.
Yeah, I bet they are, yeah.
Yeah. And for They Shall Not Grow Old, the film didn't have a lot of theaters to play in, and it's one of those films that it got its expansion last week, and that's when a lot of people were going to want to see it. I mean, the documentary film from Warner Brothers by Peter Jackson, looking at recovered footage from World War I that's been colored and put up to proper frame rate and had music and things added to it. This was great for a lesson in our history, but not exactly a big box office draw, though it did do considerable business at $13.5 million. So you look at these 4 films, and as you said, nothing's really a surprise. They all ran their course. The only real disappointment being The Kid Who Would Be King.
Right. Question about They Shall Not Grow Old. That had a massive increase in theater count, right?
Yeah, last week was its real expansion. So
Okay.
yeah. It says 8 weeks of release, but it wasn't really 8 weeks of release because prior to last week, it was only released in limited and in special event screening, almost like a Fathom event. It's kind of like how you look at the box office at one point in the summer and you'll see an IMAX release that says it's been in theaters for like 160 weeks, which isn't really, it's not really the case. It's just, it's 160 weeks since the film was put anywhere.
Right.
Number 10.
All right, so now moving into our top 10, we start with number 10. This week, that is Miss Bala from Sony, down from the number 3 position, taking in $2.7 million, a 60% decrease from last week. Its theater counts hold steady at 2,203 screens, averaging just over $1,200 per screen, to bring its cume up to $11.8 million. It's in its second week of release with a $15 million budget. This film was a talking point last week when I had Freya on. As we were discussing, it was the only film in the top 10 purporting a female director and with a leading actress in Gina Rodriguez, who this is a complete departure for her from what she's known for. Most people know her from Jane the Virgin on streaming. To see that the film dropped 60%, slightly more than what you would expect from a film, normally 50% is the norm. 60% drop could be due to either word of mouth or a competing title in Cold Pursuit, which we'll talk with later.
Right.
They finally were able to lock down a cinema score on the film. They didn't report one last week, which was usually a red flag when you don't see cinema scores coming out from opening weekend. But Miss Bala scored a B in cinema score, so I think the theater is breathing a bit of a sigh of relief from that. Because when put to contrast with its 25% on Rotten Tomatoes, I think they were expecting a much worse grade than that, which would have further hurt the film via word of mouth. But John, this film here, are you familiar with Gina Rodriguez?
I am familiar with Gina Rodriguez, and I saw an interview with her recently when she was out promoting the film. It's a big departure for her. I think it's great that, first of all, we've got women directors, we've got a woman star, we've got a Hispanic woman star, and it's an action star, bringing some action genre to, I don't want to call it a niche film, but just because it has certain, it's a female-led film, it's got a Hispanic lead character, and it's an action film. So, it probably narrows the scope a little bit. But, if people are willing to accept Gina Rodriguez as an action star, and if she can pull it off, which I haven't seen it, so I will assume that she's doing a reasonable job. It's making a little bit of money here, so
I mean, it is a bit of a niche when all the things are put together because yes, it's a female-led action film. Yes, as a female director. Yes, it's a Hispanic female lead, but also it's a remake of a 2011 action film from Mexico.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Miss Bala from Sony is a remake of the 2011 action film from Mexico of the same title.
Okay.
And that's reflected in its marketing because as I was discussing last week, I didn't see a whole lot of marketing for it. And the marketing I did see was paired with product or other films that are geared towards a Hispanic audience. Even the 2 trailers that I saw for the film, which came on while looking at Hulu, were completely in Spanish. I think Sony wanted to capitalize on this niche that they've created with this film. But I think when you have an actress like Gina Rodriguez, who is known by a much broader demographic because of her work in Jane the Virgin, I think Sony probably should have taken advantage of that and geared their marketing towards a much broader audience.
I agree.
So, and now next up for Gina Rodriguez to continue in this vein is she'll be doing the live-action Carmen Sandiego project as the titular character Carmen Sandiego.
Okay. Again, no new ideas, huh?
No, that doesn't exist now.
Yeah, I know.
Number 9.
So moving on in the countdown now, we're up to number 9. Down from number 5 this week is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, also from Sony. The film took in $3 million, only a 33% drop from last week. The film saw a drop of about 500 screens from its count, bringing its theater count down to 1,726 for a per-screen average of just over $1,700. The film has now made a domestic total of $179.8 million in its 9th week of release, and here it is, still hanging in there in the top 10. I think due in large part to the strength of the film, but also to its Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Film. John, have you seen Spider-Man? Was it one of the screeners, or?
The screeners I got were for SAG, so we didn't get anything on that. I haven't seen it. I personally am not a fan of animated films. There's no good reason for it. other than I grew up on cartoons, and to me cartoons are cartoons and real action is real action, and I get confused when we mix them up. So my thought on this is I know Spider-Man, but I don't understand why this is a big gigantic hit as compared to the live action films. It's animated and it doesn't even follow the traditional line. Am I correct on that?
Correct. What Sony did purposely was they wanted to take this film and make it outside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, much like they did with Venom earlier in 2018.
Yeah, how'd that work out?
I think the Venom property is cursed. I think Sam Raimi and Topher Grace ruined that for everybody. And you're right. This Spider-Man is different. It's a departure from everything else that happens with Spider-Man, at least on the big screen. And that's kind of a for better or for worse thing. I mean, the better of it is it allows audiences to walk into something new without having to have caught up on the previous 5 titles like you do when you're in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But for worse is, yes, it is an animated film. Yes, it's successful, but it's not nearly as successful as its live action counterparts.
Uh-huh.
When you look at box office take of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse versus the other 6 live action Spider-Man movies that we've had, this film ranks at the bottom. It's 7th place. So while it's a hit and made for a much smaller budget than the live action counterparts, it does seem to kind of have that stigma about it. I think a lot of people think in the same vein that you do that, oh, this is an animated film.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I took my daughter to go see it. I was kind of expecting, which you were expecting, oh, this is an animated film. It's going to be kid-friendly, kid-appropriate, but it takes a very grown-up turn 15 minutes into the film when, for anybody who hasn't seen it, this is a bit of a spoiler, but when Kingpin kills Peter Parker by his hands, which sets into motion this Spider-Verse, because the bad guy wins in the beginning and now the new hero's journey begins in trying to accrue all these other varieties of Spider-Man, which then set forth to take down Kingpin. So there's a lot about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse that's certainly wouldn't play exclusively to a child demographic.
Right.
But I think, yes, at first glance, when you look at the film, either in trailers or in commercials, it feels like your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that you would watch on Saturday morning.
And let me clarify that I don't have anything against animated films. I just love live action. I mean, I'm a stage actor and stuff like that. So to me, I love going to see actors, and sometimes animation is fun. And I agree. I have a friend who's the post-production supervisor at Pixar. I respect it. It just doesn't work for me. So sorry.
No, I mean, nothing to apologize for. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are in the same boat in their viewpoint on it. I mean, it does feel that seeing anything to do with it, it feels like a Saturday morning cartoon just in feature-length version. Now, having said that, once you sit in the theater and you watch the film, it's quite the experience, both stylistically and aesthetically. Just the combination of what feels like hand-drawn animation with CGI, with just all the layering. They went to great length to make this film as visual as it is, and it's being touted very highly by animation guilds and things like that, which of course lends itself to why here it is as a winner of Golden Globe for Best Animated Picture and a nominee for the Academy Award for Best Animated Picture.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 8.
So moving on to number 8 now, the countdown down from number 4 is Aquaman from Warner Brothers, speaking of comic book films. The film took in $3.3 million, only a 32% drop from last week. The film lost just over 700 screens to bring its theater count down to 2,202. The film averaged just under $1,500 per screen to bring its cume up to $328.5 million domestic and still over $1.1 billion worldwide. So Aquaman, in its 8th week of release, is already worldwide the highest grossing DC property of all time. Domestically, it won't catch up to Wonder Woman, but probably within a week from now, it'll surpass Batman v Superman for number 2 on that list. Here we are again, John, with there's another comic title, another superhero title.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Aquaman?
Oh boy. I'm not in the Marvel universe or the superhero universe. Not because I don't like him, but when I was a kid, it was Superman, and it was Superman alone. So I'm remaining faithful to Superman. I don't know. Is Jason Momoa a big enough name to really make this movie, well, $328 million, I guess? I don't know. big action movie, you know, a lot of computer stuff, a lot of people flying around, jumping around. I'd be hard pressed to go in and find a story.
Yeah, well, I've seen Aquaman.
Yeah.
And you're right. I discussed this with Michael Babbitt a couple weeks ago on the show, and he put it best. He said that there's 5 minutes of story that could make it really good. The potential is there to have a really good story attached to it, but there's only 5 minutes really spent on the story and 2 hours and 5 minutes spent on the action.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. I think Jason Momoa has quite the following, both because of his appearance, his personality on screen and off, but also he did have a role in Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones, right.
Wildly successful series on HBO. So, you know, he does have star power in that. Warner Brothers just pumped and promoted this movie out there so much from the first inklings of it when Jason Momoa showed up as Aquaman in 2 or 3 previous DC films. He showed up in Batman v Superman and Justice League. So they were already planting the seeds for this film and working at it for about the last 2 years for Aquaman to make his appearance. I think that has a lot to do with it. It was a long game marketing, but also, as I've talked about in weeks past, Aquaman, just this particular title from DC and Warner Brothers really stuck to trying to follow what works and what is successful for Marvel in the comic book movie formula. Previously, audiences looked down upon a lot of the previous DC titles, except for Wonder Woman, just because they were so dark and brooding, and Zack Snyder just made Batman v Superman into feeling like Sucker Punch and 300 and Watchmen. It was just so dark. And so now Aquaman is a bit more light-hearted fare. He throws in a few zingy one-liners like action stars of the 80s would. And DC's going to hold that up for a little bit because in March you've got Shazam coming out, so that's going to be another lighthearted, more fun for the family type film. But I think looking ahead, DC and Warner Brothers have some serious choices to make in how they're going to present themselves as a brand and what makes them unique as DC, because once Joaquin Phoenix's Joker comes out and once The Batman comes out, now they're talking about having James Gunn, recently leaving Marvel to hop ship to the DC universe. He's going to do a complete reboot of the Suicide Squad and a separate Harley Quinn movie that's going to come out. It's kind of all over the place, and I'm curious how DC and Warner Brothers bring everything in line to have the conformity to identify themselves as a DC film.
Yeah.
Marvel has mastered that. Over 12 years now, Marvel has mastered what a Marvel film is and bringing them all in line and cleverly intertwining them with all the different films and with their TV content. And I think DC really needs to kind of find its voice in all of that.
Number 7.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 7. Down from number 6 this week is Green Book from Universal, taking in $3.5 million, only an 18% drop this week. The film lost just under 500 screens, bringing its theater count down to 2,149. The film's still averaging over $1,600 per screen and has brought its cume up to $61.5 million in its 13th week of release on a $23 million budget. Now, this film, John, I imagine, since it was a SAG Award winner for Mahershala Ali, you've been able to see the screener on this?
Yes, I have.
And what were your thoughts on Green Book?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant film. I think it's timely. I think it's simple. It's a relationship between these two guys, and it's beautifully acted. Both performances. I feel bad for Viggo Mortensen because I think he kind of goes a bit unnoticed because Mahershala Ali is certainly, he's hot right now. And Viggo's sort of an established guy who we've known as always reliable and been around. So he's getting less attention. And I feel bad for him, but I think the movie's just great. It's a film that I think people need to see to go back and say, we need to look at how things are today. They haven't changed as much as we think they have.
And I mean, looking at the film, it's got 5 Academy Award nominations. It's nominated for Best Picture, for Best Actor for Viggo Mortensen, Best Supporting Actor for Mahershala Ali.
Which I don't get, because both of those parts are equal. You can't find a more equal. I mean, it's sort of like the theme of the movie. So it's funny to me that the nominations played out the way they did.
I find sometimes that they put actors who are even in leading roles in a supporting category sometimes. I think it comes down to marketing and to who their PR thinks they have a better chance at in the category.
I think I've heard that actually it's the film companies submit you within certain categories. They actually submit you that you are for your consideration for a particular award. I don't think that's really the Academy. I think that's the company saying, where's our best shot? If we go here, if we put Viggo here and we put Mahershala here, then we got a chance of getting both awards. Whereas if we put them as both best actor, one gets to choose over the other, which is ridiculous because, you know, the whole idea of awards and contests for actors to me is a bit odd. But I think that's how they do it.
I think that's what's happening with the favorite. I mean, Olivia Colman's up for Best Actress, but then Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz will be competing against one another in the Best Supporting Actress category this year.
And the funny thing is all three of them are really lead roles in that film. Although I will say Olivia Colman is unbelievably good. She really is. She takes the movie away from the other two women. It's a great film.
I'm still meaning to see it. And actually, I wasn't familiar with Olivia's work until watching The Lobster on Netflix a couple weeks back. And while her part wasn't huge in it, what she did as the hotel manager was just really well done. Looking at the Green Book now, I mean, does Mahershala Ali sweep the table at this one? Because he's already won the Golden Globe. He's already won the SAG Award. Does he take home the Academy Award as well, you think?
Yep. I think he will. Yeah, I think he's hot. It's a big year. They love him. He's got True Detective playing right now, which is very interesting. I mean, it's certainly an improvement over season 2. You know, he's on top of it all. So I think that momentum has a lot to do with also the voting for the award.
I feel like he maybe hasn't even cooled down yet from Moonlight because he's been going strong since then.
Oh, no. No, he's just burning. Actually, he started, I mean, he really came into view in House of Cards. That's where he started getting hot, and he's just been on a complete, if anything, an upswing since then, and he's still rising. He's pretty good. I think he's going to get the award.
One of the things that really surprised me, and I didn't really absorb it, is that Peter Farrelly directed the film.
I know.
It's just a surprise, because I only know Peter Farrelly from every slapstick film made from mid-90s through the early aughts, and
exactly. Good for him. I think that's going to open up a lot of doors for him directorially, that he will be seen as less of, you know, the kind of frat boy director and now as a serious film director. It's a great movie.
Number 6.
Moving on in our countdown, we're up to number 6 now, and this is the first of our 4 new releases this week. We have The Prodigy from Orion, taking in $6 million on 2,530 screens, per screen average of just over $2,300. And in its first weekend, making $6 million, it has matched what is reported as the production budget for the film. So, with minimal effort and minimal budget, they've matched that. And even with a standard rate of descent as week over week goes on, Orion's looking at some profit on this. And The Prodigy seems like another somewhat genre film in the horror sense, in that, you know, here's this young boy who's seemingly a genius, but also could be a sociopath based on his behavior and the things that he does. I think a lot of the attraction to this film is the young boy who's in the lead of the film of The Prodigy is known as Georgie from It from last year.
Oh, and Taylor Schilling from Orange is the New Black is the lead.
Yes, and that show's getting ready to wrap up its final season once it premieres, I believe, this summer. So
right.
She'll be looking to be doing a lot more roles herself. With The Prodigy, are you much into the horror or thriller or supernatural genres?
That's one of my favorite genres. So, yeah, I would look forward to seeing this one. I mean, it's just out. This one looks good. I thought Orion went under. Are they back?
They're owned by a parent company, as you know, or as you may not know. So this weekend, also with The Prodigy, another going to be released by Orion property is the kind of reboot of Child's Play.
Yeah.
The trailer for that was attached to The Prodigy. That'll be another Orion release, and that'll be later this year as well. So they're still there. They exist. I feel like they almost exist in name alone at this point. Kind of like how New Line is Warner Brothers. Like, you see New Line, it's
right.
like, yeah, it's New Line, but really it's Warner Brothers. I mean, I was surprised when I saw Orion as the studio, because I don't remember really having seen Orion releases since probably the last 10 years. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I always did like their little opening animation.
Circle of Stars. And,
that sticks with me. But with The Prodigy, I'll be interested to see where this stands next week for a couple of reasons. Number one, the film's not critically loved, obviously, as most horror films aren't. I mean, the film's got a 45% on Rotten Tomatoes, and in Cinema Score, it's got a C+, which means it's average at best by what audiences think coming out of the theater. So that word of mouth and that lack of critical acclaim, combined with the fact that another genre horror film and a sequel at that is coming out next week in Happy Death Day to You, I think the idea of a competing genre film with The Prodigy and a new film will probably hurt The Prodigy's box office looking into next week. We may even see it drop out of the top 10 completely. So we'll just have to see how much holding power The Prodigy has moving forward.
I would venture not too much.
Yeah, I don't see The Prodigy following a path similar to that of Escape Room. I mean, Escape Room, up until this week, just really hung in there with minimal drops and warranted a sequel for itself and grossed over $100 million worldwide.
Right.
Whereas The Prodigy, at $6 million, it made $6 its opening weekend. Come this time next week, it will be considered a profit for Orion, and that might be good enough for them. They may just start looking ahead.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
Now we've reached the point in the program where we like to take an aside and get to know our special guest a little better. This week we have John Romeo, whom I mentioned is a veteran actor of stage and screen. He's also a director and cinematographer. John, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
As you said, I'm an actor. Primarily, that's how I've made my living. I was a member of a local theater company called the New York State Theater Institute. We were a professional theater company, and I was a member of that for just about 30 years. Closed down a few years ago, and so I've been freelance ever since, doing a lot of stage work, some film acting, and because this theater job was such a regular job, I never had the opportunity to sort of take time off and do other projects. So now that the Theater Institute is gone and I'm in a position now to sort of expand into other things. A few years ago, I co-directed a documentary called The Neighborhood That Disappeared, and that was shown on the PBS station here. Broke all their records on the night it showed for pledges. So I'm proud of that. And the film was well received. And then I've been directing some theater, do a lot of acting lately, and cinematography, which I know that's your bailiwick, Sean, and you're one of my heroes. But nonetheless, I still love shooting, and I've been shooting since the 80s, video and stuff, and making little movies. And I recently did a short of my own that I directed. I'm continuing to push forward with projects. I start next month rehearsing at Capitol Repertory Theater for Shakespeare in Love. I'll be in that show. And meanwhile, prepping with a local actor and playwright and director, David Bunce. We're working on developing a short, and we're also developing with Troy Foundry Theater a web series, a short web series called Troy Walks Home. So there's a couple of things going there, and I like to keep my hands on both sides of the camera. I like to do a little bit of production work, and I like to do a little bit of acting, and I just like to be able to spread myself around. So that's me in a nutshell for now.
All right. And regular listeners of the show may also recognize you as the voice of the Weekend Take, providing our countdown and our segues. That's another one of the talents you have, is as a voiceover artist.
True. And actually, I should have mentioned that because I do a lot of voiceover work, which is great. You know, you can do it in your pajamas. You don't have to get dressed. You can be a slob. You can smell. You know, you don't have to be anything. You don't have to shave, you don't have to comb your hair, you don't have to brush your teeth. You can just go in and rip and read. And sometimes I don't even have to go in. I can sit in my pajamas and do it at my computer. But the voiceover work is something I love doing. It's great fun.
All right, well, great. So John, as an actor with as many years experience as you have, and this is a tough question because you said you like being an actor and spreading your wings in that, and you've spent as much time as you have on stage.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference of stage versus screen as an actor?
Well, nowadays, I do like doing film work a little bit more. I've done so much stage work over the years. You know, I've been acting on stage since the 70s. So I've done a lot of stuff on stage. And I just find that film work, because it's a different style of acting, it sort of makes you flex different muscles creatively. I'm enjoying film work. There's not as much around, and because I'm SAG, I'm limited to what I can legally do, projects I can get involved with. You're supposed to work under contracts, as I do with my theater acting. So I have to try to pick and choose my projects acting wise. But acting in film, I want to do more of, and I want to explore more of.
So now looking over the years you've spent on stage, a couple of questions stem from that. First off, is what's your favorite piece to either be in or to see? Like if you could attend any production of any play, what would it be?
Well, if I could see any play, that's a tough one. I'm partial to Shakespeare. I do a lot of Shakespeare. So to me, any good production of Shakespeare, give me a Romeo and Juliet. And it has nothing to do with the name other than I just think it's just one of the most beautifully romantic, wildly romantic plays. And that's a show that I've done 3 or 4 times over the years, but the last production I did of it was one of my favorite times doing it. And for you Shakespeare experts out there, know that I played Friar Lawrence and the nurse, who one is male, obviously Friar Lawrence is male, and the nurse is played generally as a female. And in one particular scene, they have a scene together, and I had to play both parts.
How did that work?
Well, I'd like to say, I think it worked very well. It was a concern of mine. How would we do this transformation on stage where I'm talking one way as playing this one character, and then I have to respond as the other character. And what we found was it was a combination meeting with the costume designer and also with the director and myself of a way of designing a costume that if I turned upstage, just to like do a small turn upstage, I could open the costume and there would be this other suggestion underneath of the other character. So I literally would be, as Friar Lawrence, I would talk to the nurse, place her in a place on stage, and then I would speak to her, and then I would take a breath, and as I walked over to get into her place, I would undo this sort of robe that I had, and there was this piece underneath that we had already recognized as the nurse. And then there's a slight change of the physical quality and then a little vocal change. I didn't play a woman. I just found a more feminine side of myself. And because of that little thing of transitioning on stage, it was an experiment and it was a risk. And it was a risk that paid off. And when you can take risks and they pay off, those are really, really important moments. And so that particular moment of achieving that, to have the audience go, you know what? I totally believe both characters. That's like, thank you very much. That's all I needed to do. So I guess Romeo and Juliet really is where I'm going to end up with both, to answer both of those questions. It's a play I love seeing and when it's well done, and it's probably one of the strongest performances that I feel I've accomplished something I set out to do.
I guess then, is that also, your favorite of the roles that you've played on stage, or do you have...
No, it's not. It's one of my favorite moments on stage. My favorite roles, there's so many. There's so many difficult. But the one that I think was the most challenging was Willy Loman in Death of a Salesman, which I did a while ago. You're playing a man who is just at the worst moment in his life. And it's one of the most well-written pieces of American theater in the last 100 years. And it's a Herculean effort. So for me, the responsibility of playing that part was big. And then the effort was the most work I've ever done and the most honest and most truthful I had done up to that point. So Death of a Salesman definitely is my favorite role that I have played. I'm not sure I'd want to do it again. Maybe I would.
Is there a role that you haven't had an opportunity to play that you would love to play?
I can't think of one right off the top of my head. A few years ago, when I was at the theater company, my boss asked me that, and it was Lenny in Of Mice and Men. And then the next season, she gave me that role, so I got to play it. So there really isn't anything, which is why I don't chase a lot of theater nowadays, because there really aren't a lot of roles that I'm dying to play. I'm not ready to play Lear yet.
No,
I don't think I'm
not ready for King Lear.
No, and the problem is when you're ready for it, you're too old to play it. But so you got to find a happy medium. I'm probably getting close to where I could play it. I'm not sure that the opportunity is there for me. It's not a play done a lot. Yeah, no, that would be like one of the only ones right off the top of my head that I haven't that would be worth a shot. In
the years that you've been doing this, what's the best advice that you've been given?
The best advice that I've been given? I'm not sure I've been given a lot of good advice. My advice would always be as honest as you can in a performance. If anything, that may have been the best advice I ever got when I was in college with my acting teachers, was just try to find the truth, try to be honest. There are times when you're going to play a character that's bigger than life, but still there's life.
Okay.
And there's still a heart. There's still a person inside that they have wants, they have needs, they have desires. So be honest to them. Just find the truth in the script and in the text and in the moment. Find the truth. That's my advice. Yeah, stop acting. Stop acting. Just be. Be there. Be on stage. Live the moment. Don't try to act it. Don't try to pretend you're someone else. You can't be someone else. You only have yourself. So use that as the source of your character.
I believe I remember in you and I talking that you do have a video on demand release that you acted in coming out in March?
Yeah, there's a couple of things coming out. I have a feature film that's being premiered right now. It's at the Boston Sci-Fi Film Festival maybe last weekend, and it's called Accelerator, and it's with Ryan Wessine and Laura James, John James, Sam J. Jones, who was Flash Gordon, Sean Young from Blade Runner, Maxwell Caulfield, and shot up in Rutland for the most part. And that's coming out. That's the biggest thing. And I had a pretty good role in that. So I did get to see the movie, and I wasn't embarrassed.
You have some works, both your own as a short film and your contributions to a larger project coming soon as well, yes?
Yes. Well, my short film, I didn't DP that. That was Lakota Ruby Eck. I wanted to concentrate on directing. But I did shoot a sizzle reel for a project called Hell's Acres, which I really like what I shot for that. I was really proud of that work. And John Holzer, who is a filmmaker, has been working for the past year on a project, which I guess is now a feature film, and it's called Who Killed Hazel Drew? The Twin Peaks Mystery. And what I saw of just rough pieces of that stuff, I'm very happy with that.
So where can people check out what you're up to? I know you said you're doing Shakespeare in Love. That's for Capital Rep, correct, here in Albany?
Correct. The one thing I am bad at is social media. There's a problem when you're a very private person and you have certain things that are public that you have to do. And I'm always at a loss of posting stuff about me. I always feel uncomfortable. But John Romeo on Facebook, or I do have a production company called Fat Actor Productions, spelled Phatakter, because I used to be a really big fat actor. As in fat actor. I'm still fat a bit, but I'm 200 pounds less fat. I do post things on my Facebook page. When things start happening with Cap Rep, I'll be posting stuff from that.
And when we discuss Cap Rep, we're talking about the Capitol Repertory Theater in Albany, New York.
That's correct. Capitol Repertory Theater.
Okay.
Albany, New York.
Okay. Well, great. Is there anything else you want to say or add before we move on to the countdown, John?
Let's go on to the countdown, Sean.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to tell us a bit more about yourself and for being here on the show this week. So
probably way more than anybody wanted to know, but there you go.
It's all fascinating stuff. It's all no, I think it's all fascinating stuff. I mean, especially for listeners of the show who are more film oriented to learn about the other side of the coin and being stage acting. I mean, it's very educational for them.
Number 5.
Moving on to the countdown now, we are up to number 5. Down from the number 1 spot is Glass from Universal, taking in $6.4 million, only a 32.7% drop from last week. The film lost a small amount of theaters, losing 411 screens to bring its count down to 3,254. The film averaged just under $2,000 per screen and has brought its cume up to $98.4 million in its 4th week of release on a $20 million budget. Now, Glass, as we know, is from M. Night Shyamalan and is a continuation of the conjoined storylines of Unbreakable and Split, which came out in 2016. And as I've said in the past couple of weeks, is great to see such a return to prominence for M. Night Shyamalan in making films that are both successful and are being received well. It seems that the stink of The Happening and The Village are off of him. So, did you see Unbreakable or Split?
Yes, I did see both of those. I haven't seen Glass yet. And I'm happy for him. I got a little worried about Mr. Shyamalan because he had such a wonderful beginning and he just went downhill from there because I thought that was a brilliant film. And I've been disappointed with everything I've seen from him since. I was not a big fan of Unbreakable, the original one, although I did like Split. I didn't get Unbreakable at the time. I would have to go back and look at it now. But I'm glad that it seems like people haven't just abjectly rejected his work and are giving him a chance, and that this movie's making money. That's great.
Well, I think he had to make a lot of that chance for himself because Glass, Split, and The Visit, which are his last 3 films to come out, were all funded out of his pocket.
Yeah.
He's making his own chances at this point, and Universal is just taking a minimal risk in the sense of, okay, well, he paid for the film. All we have to do is market it and put it out and hope for the best. And if it fails, well, it's more on him than us. But
do you think this is going to bring him back into like the fold of successful filmmakers?
I think it's going to allow him to keep making films that are personal to him and not necessarily have to buy into making what one would consider a studio film. I think another example of that is Steven Soderbergh, who has projects that he likes to make that are personal to him. But in order to make those films happen, he has to do like an Ocean's 11 or something like that. I think Shyamalan is on a good trajectory right now where he won't necessarily have to do that. He can keep being very selective and making just the films that he wants to make. So I don't think it's so much about him being brought back into the fold as it is him just more firmly establishing himself as a top tier director and a filmmaker and really an auteur himself, because nearly every project that he's directed, he's also written. The only exception being After Earth, which was an abysmal film. But, that's really the only exception. So I don't think he needs to be brought back into the fold, really, of studios. I think he can just keep doing what he's doing.
But I'm glad to see that, people are going to see this movie, and I'd like to see him make the most of this situation.
I mean, I also think a large part of it has to do in that he has connected himself with very good talent in the films. Yeah. I mean, James McAvoy in Split playing as many roles as he did, and then carrying that over into Glass now, and then Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson. You surround yourself with good talent, it certainly helps to make your film much better.
Yeah.
It is great to see Shyamalan doing as well as he has been. In the pantheon of his work, it's still going to land, middle of the pack. And as I mentioned last week, I think long gone are the days where a studio is going to throw a bunch of money at him to make a film because they're probably not as sure that they'll get that kind of return. I think finally, after 20 years, he's found his groove as a director, and it seems to be in making smaller budget, smaller number of location films that are personal to him and are stories that he wants to tell.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 4.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 4 this week. Down from number 2 is The Upside from STX Entertainment, which continues to be a solid performer at the box office. This week, The Upside took in $7.2 million, only a 16.8% drop from last week, which seems to be the recurring theme with The Upside, is its small incremental drops week over week, which is more the exception than the rule. This week, The Upside only lost 196 theaters, still in 3,372 theaters, still averaging over $2,100 per screen, and has brought its cume up to $85.8 million now in its 5th week of release on just a $37.5 million budget. John, looking at this film and everything that went against it, should have went against it, under normal circumstances would have buried this film, made it dead on arrival, from the controversy with Kevin Hart stepping down from the Oscars because of Twitter, with people seemingly coming after Bryan Cranston for portraying a quadriplegic when he's not actually quadriplegic, from the fact that the film had been delayed for over a year, and that delay was large in part due to the fact that the previous entity that owned The Upside was the Weinstein Group, which went through its own myriad of controversies. So now all these things happen, and The Upside, here it is, just defying all of statistically what would be expected of it to fail and to be dead on arrival, and just not only meeting but exceeding industry expectations, probably STX's expectations, and is being enjoyed by audience goers. What are your thoughts on The Upside?
My thoughts are that it's Bryan Cranston and Kevin Hart and Nicole Kidman that are holding this movie up. I would just say it's those two personalities. People love both of them, both Kevin Hart and Bryan Cranston. They have big television presence. I mean, Breaking Bad is still all over the place. I think it's new for Cranston to sort of hit in movies. Kevin, good. I think some of these comedic stars need to start proving their mettle and not just take the path of least resistance, like Melissa McCarthy in the film she just did. She kind of got away from playing the wisecracking fat girl and played a human being and didn't capitalize on her size or her comedic ability qualities or her snarkiness, but played like this really sweet little woman. So to see Kevin sort of expanding into something a little more meaningful than just being the wisecracking little guy that he can be, that's great. And to give him a couple of good actors to play against seems like he's rising to the task. So that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm. As an actor, I'm sure you have played many roles on the stage that perhaps you weren't exactly the description of the character you were portraying. I mean, we just talked about the example earlier where you played the friar and the nurse. And despite the fact that back in the times that Shakespeare was putting on plays, that all the roles were played by men, right? So obviously that kind of casting misnomer has been around for centuries. Looking at something like The Upside and looking at Bryan Cranston portraying a quadriplegic and just some of the complaint politics that have come out of it from audiences, how as an actor do you take that? What do you think when you hear something like that?
That's a tough one. I believe that whatever actor is the right person for the role, whoever is the one that the director and the people involved, the creatives, feel is the person who can portray that character best is the person who should play it. I think that saying, well, it has to be a paraplegic actor. Okay. Are there paraplegic actors who have the ability to bring in an audience that Bryan Cranston will? That is probably not going to happen. It is a business. We'd like to say that it's not fair, that, it should be played by such and such. That's tough, boy. But I just think if he plays a disservice to a paraplegic, then maybe there's a point. But maybe he brings attention to it because it's Bryan Cranston, and it's an actor's job is to portray those things that you're not, too. I've played killers. I'm not a killer. I played Lenny, who's basically mentally challenged, but no one said, well, we need to have a mentally challenged actor play that. That is my job, to play that mentally challenged person, not have a mentally challenged actor play it. Actors portray things they're not. They have to be allowed to do that. Like, I just can't play an Italian, Irish, German guy in his 60s. You can't stick me into that. That's not what I do. I play a lot of different things. I can play different ethnicities of people. I can play different accents. I can play different maladies. That's our job to do that.
Right. We were talking about earlier that the advice that you received and would both give is just be honest and just be you, but don't take it to the nth degree where literally all you can play is just you.
Right. There's plenty of movie stars that do that, who just can only play themselves. And it works as long as that's what they're playing. But an actor, you've got to have range. You've got to be able to play all these different things. Use all sides of your personality, not just the one that fits into the niche that made you famous.
Right.
Number 3.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 3. It's our second new release of the week. Cold Pursuit from Lionsgate took in $10.8 million on 2,630 screens, per screen average of $4,100, and as I mentioned, a $10.8 million cum up to this point. Now, Cold Pursuit exceeded industry expectations. The expectation was the film was going to probably land around $8 to $9 million, maybe flirt with $10 million. But once news broke last week of leading man Liam Neeson's bringing up a story from his past where it seemed racially charged and caused him to cancel appearances on like Tonight Show with Stephen Colbert and seemingly have to backpedal and defend himself during the entire PR campaign of this week leading up to the release. The film still seemed to exceed expectations, and maybe it's because people already had an interest in this film. Maybe it's because of the saying that controversy creates cash. I don't know. John, what were your thoughts when you heard about this interview that came out with Liam Neeson? And then what are your thoughts on Cold Pursuit as a film, but also in this kind of recurring theme of Liam Neeson always playing this kind of aging badass that just takes out everybody?
Yeah. On one level, because I think Neeson and I are pretty close to the same age, I'm glad to see, a guy of some age being seen as an action star. What disappoints me is that Liam Neeson is a good actor. I feel he's wasted in these action movies. We all know that the stories are always relatively thin. And, he's a good actor. He fills the moments as best he can. But, when you see him in something like Schindler's List, his breakdown at the camp when the people were leaving on the train was one of the most heartbreaking and beautiful moments I had seen in years. As far as the controversy, I sort of gave him props for being honest about what he went through at the time. Now, I think we've all sort of blown it up into, well, he must still be this way, or there's some sort of implication that, well, he's a racist. No, he had a friend of his who was raped by a man who she told him he was black, and he just got mad about that. And, you know, he's a crazy Irishman. He's gone through a lot in his life. His wife, Natasha Richardson, was killed at a very young age in a skiing accident not that long ago. And I cut the guy some slack. You know, he's saying it now to say, I'm ashamed that I felt this. We've got a bunch of people in this country that can't admit that they still have racist feelings. Yet here's a man who's being open and honest that he went through this. I don't believe he feels it now, and I don't think he's still walking the streets of London with a stick in his hand looking for an African-American, or pardon me, a black man to beat the crap out of. I just think that he was sharing a moment that he was uncomfortable with, and that he was being honest and taken to task for it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the thing, is that, you know, he's talking about something that happened 40 years ago while living in an environment that spawned a lot of hatred in itself. So here he is. Yep. He's a product of that environment. He's a young man in his 20s at this point, and he gets angry. I mean, I can't imagine anybody else who in their 20s didn't get upset over something, or even younger, who maybe blew something out of proportion and became overly upset over it. In his case, when he's in an environment surrounded by this animosity towards most all people, like, it's just, I can't sit there and knock him for that. Yes, if he still felt that way now, 40 years later, then then there's a problem. He's talking about this story, which for him, maybe it was the source of some of that honesty in himself in the role, because the role he's playing is someone who is pursuing men that may have been responsible for the death of his son.
And as an actor, you know, something we were talking about, you have to go to those places to be honest in the moment. You know, he can't fake what he feels. You know, that's not what he does. And he just, I think, was admitting that, I went back to that moment and thought about that anger and what I went through then. And I tapped into that for this. As far as this particular controversy, I think, you know what? Let's move on, folks. There are bigger controversies than Liam Neeson's racist feelings 40 years ago that he's well over with.
Yeah. I don't know, but it seemingly didn't hurt Cold Pursuit, as it exceeded the industry expectations. It didn't quite reach the box office opening, that similar fare that Liam Neeson has done most recently last year around this time when Commuter came out. That film opened to about $13 million, had more screens though. This film opened to 10.8. So I imagine they'll probably follow the same trajectory. Maybe everybody gets what they want out of this, and we see Liam Neeson return to more dramatic work, and we can just put all of this behind us. And I'm sure Liam Neeson's hoping everyone puts it behind them as well, so he can just continue working.
Sure.
Number 2.
So moving on the countdown now, we're up to number 2, and at number 2 is our third new release of the week, What Men Want from Paramount, which took in $19 million its opening frame on just over 2,900 screens. The film averaged $6,500 per screen, and as I mentioned, its cume sits at $19 million its opening weekend on a $20 million budget. Now, What Men Want is another example of a film that exceeded some of the industry expectations as the comedy remake of the 2001 film What Women Want, which starred Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt. In this iteration, starring Taraji P. Henson and Tracy Morgan, has exceeded expectations and has been enjoyed by audiences thus far. Again, another example of a film not as enjoyed by critics. The film has a 48% on Rotten Tomatoes, but an A- on CinemaScore. So again, critics not warming up to it. Audience goers are enjoying it. So John, what are your thoughts on What Men Want? Did you? I'm sure you saw the original with Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt.
Yeah, I don't know. I get frustrated with remake life. It happens in theater all the time now, and it happens in movies. You know, it's just like, well, let's just remake it change this little chemistry up. If it's funny, if it works, Adam Shankman's a good director. Tracy Morgan is a popular figure. Taraji Henson, it seems like it's got good legs. Certainly there's a big audience for seeing Tracy come back to the movies now, and she has a big following. People love her. I like her too. So I would say it'll probably be here for a couple of weeks or so, and then it's going to disappear and go to television.
What I'm just now kind of putting together as well, and seeing how What Men Want performed, and this going back to our number 4, which was The Upside, which we discussed, it seems more of a compliment to The Upside than What Men Want. But What Men Want and The Upside both play to similar demographic. The fact that these are both kind of competing for the same audience, and not only did What Men Want exceed expectations, but the upside having such a small drop really speaks to, I think, the strength of both films, showing that there is enough audience for both these films. And maybe people saw both this weekend. I don't know, but
probably because of the time of year post-Christmas that you got a little bit of an older demographic wanting to get out of the house in February and go see a movie, and that these are a couple of date night movies too, because I think you're going to find a lot of young people like Tracy Morgan and they like Kevin Hart. Whatever all that means, that's my opinion.
Okay. Well, and I said to my wife, I said, because my wife wants to see it, and I said, why do we need to see this? I'm like, the movie's called What Men Want. This could be a short film. We're not complicated individuals.
Right. Yes. Oh, very short. I mean, short in time. Yeah. Right.
Oh, wait, that sounds terrible too. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So before we get into our number one, stemming off of our discussions on the last couple of films that were in the countdown, one of the things that's seemingly is becoming a bit more rampant in the film industry lately is this idea, especially in 2019. It just seems every week when I go to do this show, there's some other controversy or complaint politic matter that's come up. This week it was Liam Neeson. In weeks past, it's been the writer of Green Book, Nick Vallelonga, and his tweets from his past. Other examples have been, looking at Kevin Hart, who had to withdraw from hosting the Oscars because of tweets from his past. Most famously, James Gunn being excommunicated from the Marvel Cinematic Universe because of 10-year-old tweets from him. Also, we mentioned Bryan Cranston and the kind of backlash that he's gotten for portraying a character with a physical handicap that he himself does not possess. More importantly, looking at these celebrities who some would say are kind of suffering from a bit of foot and mouth syndrome with what they're saying or what they've done. John, do we as a society, are we obligated to hold celebrities' feet to the fire for the entire history of their social media presence and hold everything they've said verbatim them accountable for?
No. The answer is no. In this country, particularly, there's way too much value to celebrity. We elected a celebrity as a president. We didn't elect a politician. We didn't elect really even a businessman. He's a celebrity. He was a reality show host. I go through this a lot because I am not someone who ever pursued celebrity. I've worked as an actor nearly all my life, not on Broadway. I've worked off Broadway. I've worked London's West End, not for fame, not for glory, but for the work. I think that because of the internet and because of social media, there's a little bit of celebrity in everyone. When a celebrity puts something out there as a statement that we need to pay attention to it, I don't agree with that. I think we need to start separating out. Celebrities are they're actors, they're people who are in the public eye, but that doesn't mean that they are our standards for society. And I think we just need to back off and stop. I also think, frankly, that celebrities need to stay out of it. I've always said, this is an awful thing to say, but I've always said, I'm just a dancing monkey. I'm here to entertain. I'm not here, as an actor. I mean, I'm really here to take you away from the world to this story. But personally, what I am makes no difference. My thoughts, my life, my experience, it's in the work. When I come home, I think generally as an actor, I mind my own business. I don't post a lot politically. I think that who cares? Now, there are a lot of people who do care for some reason what a celebrity thinks. I don't know why. What is the mentality that a celebrity, someone who is not necessarily educated, could be, might not be, not necessarily bright, could be, but what are they? They're entertainers. They're not sages. They're not politicians. They're not professors. I don't think we're paragons of society, generally. We have opinions. There's just too much emphasis on what celebrities say. We've got to stop giving celebrities the weight that they have.
I agree. I think the thing is that a lot of celebrities, when they get to the point of celebrity, they see themselves on this platform and they turn their platform into a soapbox. Now, yeah. And that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. And by and large, a celebrity's opinion should be deemed relatively harmless. Now, granted, there are people who like the celebrities, that follow what the celebrities say. They buy the products the celebrity endorses. Now, they're not in any position of power. Now, you mentioned earlier that we currently have a former reality show host as the president of the United States of America. His social media presence should not be deemed harmless because he is in a position of power. I think sometimes we hold and discipline celebrities to almost a higher extent who have no power than someone who has a lot of power that is a celebrity. I mean, granted, there's nobody marching in the streets against Bryan Cranston playing a quadriplegic, whereas we have marches in the streets against policies and dumb things that the president says. But at the same time, a lot of times as a society, we equate the two. Like, we're giving Bryan Cranston just as much backlash hiding behind our keyboards as we give our president, and there's no reason for that. Bryan Cranston's an actor.
Right.
Kevin Hart is an actor. Right. James Gunn is a director.
And do we not allow for someone to grow over that period? You know, God, I'm sure I said stuff 25 years ago that was awful, just because at the time it was less awful maybe, or because I was less evolved. I'm a much different person than I am now, and we have to accept that people can grow. I mean, Liam Neeson, I believe that he was looking back at that situation not with wistfulness, but with disgust that he had been there, that he had gone to that, and it was a bit of a confessional thing that he did to talk about it now and to sort of say, yeah, I can't believe I was that way. But it was valuable to me because I was able to use it in this film I did. I was able to tap into the things I went through then. I think we need to give people the benefit of the doubt about that stuff. I'm of the mind that what actors have to say, what celebrities have to say is of little consequence. And we need to stop, social media needs to stop putting weight in it. Now, maybe it's up to the actor to say, maybe I just will not post that kind of stuff. The stuff that is going to sway the general public in any way. I think keep your opinions to yourself and post about your next movie. That's the way I feel. I don't think my opinions about politics are of general interest to anyone. And I'm frankly not interested in what any actor says about any politician, good or bad. I don't care what another actor thinks.
Yeah. You're talking about evolution. Maybe that makes you more evolved than all of us by being wise enough just to not partake in social media as much as some of us.
That doesn't make me anything more than anybody else. It's more about, I think people think of my opinion. It's like, who cares? Who cares what I think about the political situation? I do, and maybe my children do, or some friends of mine, but, it's just not of value to me. I think it's more interesting to read what other people are saying, people in power, and to get a sense of what's going on from that, and not what does the celebrity say? Who supports who? I don't, what celebrity supports who? I don't care.
All I mainly post about are things like this at the box office because they're numbers that I can read off of and my interpretations and opinions of them, because otherwise no one's going to give a crap what I have to say about the issues. That's one of the things with social media is most things that people put out there on social media, there's people out there who just assume everything that someone posts is some manifesto, and it's not.
Right. I do think we need to sort of calm down, folks. Let's not just take what every celebrity says and take it to heart.
And not only that, but let's not take what a celebrity says and then hold it against, or says or does, and then hold it against the art that they're taking part in. I mean, yes, Kevin Spacey did some really shady things, but I'm still going to love American Beauty. I'm still going to love The Usual Suspects. I'm still going to tune into House of Cards, previous seasons on Netflix. I think that's the main thing to take away from all this is that we really, and it's tough because of social media, celebrities also kind of lose a bit of their sense of being aloof because they can be right there and contacted and in constant contact with you through social media, or not you directly, but you as a society. I think by doing that, we commingle them as a human and them as an artist a little too much. And then because of that, their art and all the people that helped create that art, crew members, the cinematographer, the other actors, the supporting cast, suffer for it. I mean, I think there needs to be a similar secular of church and state, except of celebrity and art needs to be made.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 1.
All right, so here we are. We've made it. We are at number one. And this week at number one is the Lego Movie 2, the second part from Warner Brothers, taking in $34.4 million on just over 4,300 screens. The film averaged just under $8,000 per screen, and its cume, as I mentioned, is at $34.4 million here in its first weekend of release. The Lego Movie 2 had a softer than expected release at $34.4 million, which, while that is nearly double what the last Lego property came out, which was the Lego Ninjago movie that came out in September of 2017, it still trends very far behind both the original Lego movie and even the Lego Batman movie. All this film that had so much hype going into it is underperforming what was expected. And so the question is, well, why is that? Did it just not look as good? Did some of the originality just kind of disappear from the original? Is it just the fact that did we need a sequel? Is this just Warner Brothers cashing in on sequel dollars? There's a lot of possible reasons that it could have opened up softer than expected, but the point is still $34.4 million, still number one at the box office. It did it on a ton of screens, 4,300 screens. I don't know. I mean, this is a film that I know I'm going to see. My daughter's been talking about it for weeks now. She regularly watches the first Lego movie, regularly watches Lego Ninjago and Lego Batman. And I got to admit, I liked the first Lego movie, so I kind of want to see this too. So I don't know, John, what are your thoughts on the Lego movie?
Was this one directed by Coppola?
No.
Probably not. I'm sorry. I'm being facetious. Again, I don't have young children. It's not a movie that I'd never even had Legos. So they hold no romantic quality for me. And to me, it's about selling toys. I'm not interested in it. I'm happy that it makes money, but to me, it's a big commercial for Legos.
I agree.
Yeah. And that's fine, and your daughter will like it and you will enjoy the movie. And that's what they're for. They're for all sorts of people and all sorts of reasons. And as long as people go and enjoy it and they walk out and they've had a good hour and a half, 2 hours and not mad about the money they spent, then success.
Yeah, I think part of what attracts people to Lego Movie is it being so self-aware. I mean, it's not like you go into a Lego Movie and they're trying to tell you a story and it just so happens the medium that they chose was stop motion animation of Legos or CGI of Legos. They're very self-aware. Like, they take advantage of and poke fun at themselves for being Legos. Like, oh, his arm pops off, or, well, we need this piece. And so they pull out the very complicated instruction manual to figure out how to construct this thing. So they're very self-aware in it. And I think that's what audiences like, is that it's not trying to just be one of these CGI comedies, that it's self-aware. And I think that's part of the same allure for a more grown-up audience that attracts that more grown-up audience to something like Deadpool, which is he's very self-aware when he's on screen. So this is in that vein, a very self-aware comedy, and it worked for the first one, it worked for Batman, it worked for Lego Ninjago to an extent, and I think maybe people are just maybe getting a little tired of the self-aware humor that's involved in it. I don't know, but regardless, I think seeing where this goes next week will be the barometer of how this film will perform overall versus the other films that are in that series of Lego films.
If I didn't have a kid, and I'm not bringing a kid to the movies, why would I go see this movie?
So I think with something like Lego Movie 2, I think what brings unaccompanied adults into it is that those adults like that kind of subtle between the lines humor, and they're expecting it, and so they're going to go see it. I think if Lego Movie 2 or if Lego Movie comes out and there's no hint of any subtle or in between the lines adult humor, that I don't think that anybody goes to see it but families and children. But because it's there, because it's expected now of certain types of films, and honestly, I think one of the main reasons of Lego Movie 2 not performing as well as the first Lego movie is the first Lego movie was directed by Lord and Miller, who have just become very good at making animated films that have that humor, and this one was not. I think that the expectation of like, oh wow, they didn't just say that, is what would bring an unaccompanied adult to the movie. But if there was no promise made, if there's of that happening, then no, you wouldn't see unaccompanied adults going to it.
Yeah.
The studios are aware that they're not just trying to entertain the kids, they're trying to entertain the parents, because the parents are the one who buy the tickets and bring the kid to the movie.
And the writing's gotten more sophisticated. And I also think that parents go to the movies with their kids more nowadays, just out of, I would say, a safety factor.
True. Well, it'll be interesting to see what the level of retention is for Lego Movie 2 in the weeks ahead. And, and in looking at the weeks ahead, there's not, at least next week, Lego Movie won't have too much to battle with. I mean, in 2 weeks, completely different story because How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World comes out, and that'll steal a lot of its thunder. But at least for right now, while everything may not be awesome as the song from the first one, everything's at least good enough to be number one.
What do you think is the next blockbuster to come?
Well, I think that How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, when it comes out on the 22nd, is going to have a sizable release. But I think the first real blockbuster of 2019 is going to be when Captain Marvel comes out in March 8th, because it's superheroes, and it's Captain Marvel, and it's a female-led superhero movie. So that'll be the first blockbuster, which kind of transitions us into talking about what's going to come out next week, which won't be any of those things, despite Fox hoping so, and I'll get to that in a second. So next week, there are 3 new wide releases coming out. First is Happy Death Day to You from Universal, which will open on a little over 3,000 screens, the sequel to another horror genre film that did very well when it came out this time last year. So that'll be coming out. Also, Isn't It Romantic from Warner Brothers, coming out on a little over 3,300 screens, a romantic comedy starring Rebel Wilson. And lastly, from Fox will be Alita Battle Angel, which is going to come out on the 13th. It's going to come out on Thursday on over 3,700 screens. Now, this film is one that I've been waiting for over a year because it keeps getting delayed. And so here's a perfect example of what we were just talking about. Here's a film that had great expectations, but has all the red flags up that say it's going to fail at the box office. And it's unfortunate because I think Alita had something like, I want to say $100 or $190 million budget. It had a ridiculous budget. And even James Cameron producing it and Robert Rodriguez directing it. Bill Pope, who most people know shot the Matrix franchise. All these things are not going to save this film, and it's unfortunate because I was looking forward to this. Again, just complaint politics were one of the things that hurt it. They had to go back and redo all the visual effects because people felt that Alita's eyes were just comically big because they enlarged them for the sake of being based on an anime, and anime characters tend to have exaggerated eyes, but apparently people thought that was just comical and ridiculous. So go back, spend millions of dollars, and redo her eyes, please. That was one of the reasons why the film got pushed back so far. So now it's kind of just going to be, it's not quietly being released in February. It's over 3,700 screens, but I think Fox is looking at just walking right into a brick wall like they did with The Kid Who Would Be King. They're going to release this film on a ton of screens. It's going to do okay, just probably below average business and lose them a lot of money. So I think with Fox now, they've just kind of thrown in the towel. They're just releasing whatever they had on their slate before the takeover by Disney's made official. And I don't think they really care about what they're putting out. Like, the only thing they really care about is going to be when the Dark Phoenix comes out from the X-Men saga. So looking at those 3 releases, Alita, Happy Death Day to You, and Isn't It Romantic, and the soft opening for Lego Movie, how does next week shake out, do you think, John? Is Alita going to do just enough to be number one, or even with the soft opening for Lego Movie, does it retain enough audience to kind of cling to that number one spot, at least for one more week?
I think Alita is going to break big.
You think so?
I do. I mean, I've seen the promos for it, and it sort of caught my eye. And I was just looking at the cast list. It's got a heck of a cast. Christopher Waltz, Jennifer Connelly, Mahershala Ali, hello, Oscar nominee. Rosa Salazar, I don't know, but I'll assume she's half computer created anyway. That's just my thought. I mean, I'm not an expert on this genre of film, but I just have a feeling that because of Robert Rodriguez, too, I think a lot of a younger generation are really into Rodriguez and know him. A lot of young filmmakers that I know love his work, and I like his stuff, too. So I'm just betting that this is the one that comes out on top.
That's what I'll hope for, and I'll be seeing it this week, because I've already made a promise to some friends that we both know that we would be checking it out this week. So yeah, I'll be contributing my $14 to whatever the box office take is for it next weekend. Well, that about wraps it up for us this week on the Weekend Take. I do want to thank John for being our special guest this week.
Thank you for having me. This is great fun.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And
absolutely.
One more time, John, I know you said you don't have a lot of social media handles, but at least for the productions, for your production company and things like that, and where we can find out more about your upcoming stage performances.
Yep, both on Facebook at John Romeo, JohnRomeo, and Fat Actor Productions, which is PhatAkter Productions. and that's my production company, and I usually put a little bit of everything on there too. And I'm on IMDb, but there's other John Romeos, believe it or not, a cinematographer and I think a set designer. So John Romeo 3. And
well, I'll be sure to put the pertinent links in the episode description so people can be directed right to you. So, excellent. All right, well, that wraps it up for us this week on the Weekend Take. I want to thank everyone for listening, and again, thank John for being our special guest. And
you're welcome. Thank you.
I will see everyone next week. Thank you, and take care.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.